All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see you all and welcome you. Really excited to have this conversation this afternoon. My name is Tom Griffin. I'm an assistant professor at the Ted Rogers School of Hospitality and Tourism Management, and I'm also assistant director of the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research, who is organizing and hosting this series of talks from different academics and researchers from across the globe, sharing their expertise and their insights for us to listen to. So it's exciting to be here. And today we're really excited to have Dr. Ulrike Gretzel, Uli, and she's going to be talking to us about her research in just a little minute. I'm just going to welcome everybody, and first I'm going to give the land acknowledgement. So Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Thank you. So before I introduce Uli, I just want to introduce the Institute and who we are and what we do. So this talk is part of the Compass series. So this is a speaker series, and it's brought to you by the Institute. The Institute was established in 2009 as the research arm of our school at the Ted Rogers School of Hospitality and Tourism Management, with the mission to facilitate and conduct research of scholarly value and significance of the tourism and hospitality field to mobilize knowledge through to traditional and non-traditional channels to reach academic, student, professional audiences. So we're really just trying to connect what we do as researchers with the industry, but also with our students, and to encourage and foster a culture of research and understanding research. Our affiliates conduct research on a number of different topics, from destination marketing, sustainability and festivals, Indigenous tourism, visiting friends and relatives. That sounds interesting. And for more information, you can visit our website, which is htmresearch.ca. We also have a podcast series. So Brian, who is organizing behind the scenes this call, has been interviewing a series of different researchers and people involved with tourism research and the school. So really encourage you to take a look at our website and listen to some of those podcasts. It's called Behind the Study, and it's now already in season 2. Very exciting. So you can find it on all good places where you find your podcasts. So this afternoon, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Eureka Gretzel. Uli is currently the Director of Research at Mythnography, which is an innovative market research company. She's also a Senior Fellow at the University of Southern California's Center for Public Relations. Her research focuses on persuasion in human technology interactions, information search and processing, electronic decision aids, smart technologies, online and social media marketing, the adoption and use of technologies, as well as non-adoption and digital detox. That sounds kind of tempting right now. With over 69 peer-reviewed articles in major journals, she's frequently acknowledged as one of the most cited authors in the fields of tourism and persuasion, and her work has been quoted in major news outlets such as the New York Times. Yeah, I mean, Uli comes with a wonderful reputation. And I definitely heard of you, Uli, well before I'd met you, and so your research has a huge impact. And I've enjoyed listening to you before. I saw you speak at the TTRA in Halifax. Was it Halifax? Yeah, and smart destinations, and it was really good. So I'm really excited to be here and to host you. Just for the audience here, we're going to allow Uli to talk for a while, and there'll be a great chance to have Q&A throughout, so you can chat in the chat box, but also at the end there'll be a chance for you to come off mute and get more involved with your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Uli. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi everyone, it's a real pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for the invitation. I wish I could be there in person. I even brought my Canada mug out for the Zoom session today. So Toronto is definitely one of the places where I will try to visit as soon as I can again. And I'm going to just briefly talk about my research about dreaming about travel today. And please interrupt me if you have a question or if I'm not sure. Sometimes Zoom, when you go full screen, it doesn't allow you to see the chat window, so I might not respond immediately. But then hopefully I will leave enough time for us to talk. And and sorry, that's my husband's phone right there next to me. He got the hint. He's leaving. So this is what it's like if you're stuck at home and you share an office. But there might be a cat showing up at some point too. So that's life. So dreaming about travel. Before I'm sharing my slides, I'm actually going to ask you to maybe close your eyes for a second, or just stare into space and think about the place you want to visit when this is all over. What's the first place that comes to your mind? So I told you mine is Toronto for sure. And if you want to share with us in the chat window what your dream place is, that would be great. Oh, I see Venice. Yeah, that's amazing. So we never really stop dreaming about travel. Oh, Hawaii, yeah. Great places popping up here. And I've been fascinated with this idea of how we kind of formulate these dreams and how long we sometimes keep these dreams in our minds. And so I'm going to start my presentation and give you a little bit of background, and then I'll tell you about that specific piece of research that I've been working on. So let me see if I can share my screen here. And if you can just give me a thumbs up, someone.
Yeah, that works.
Yep, great, wonderful. All right, the places I'd like to go, places we would all like to go, exploring the travel dreams of Pinterest users. So I told you that I've been kind of exploring this idea for a while. And it actually started when I was a graduate student in Chicago. And Blanca is on our call here today. She will recognize the landscape there. So when I studied at the University of Illinois, we often did work for the Illinois Bureau of Tourism, and that involved going up to Skokie, and this is where all the market research companies are placed, and doing focus groups. And so we basically did these focus groups to test travel brochures or travel advertising for the destinations in the Midwest. And what really, fascinated me was people talking about how important these brochures were to them and how they ordered them, and how this one guy talked about how he had a basement full of filing cabinets where he stored away these travel brochures. So this was in the 1990s, early 2000s, and it was really, just absolutely exceptional to hear how much work people put into this process of kind of dreaming, but also how much pleasure people derived from this process. So this is my research dream, really, that has been unfolding over the last 20 years. And it really, kind of materialized here and there, but I finally, during this pandemic, started to think, okay, I really have to do something with this. So how did it materialize over the 20 years? I actually looked at ongoing information search more from a kind of structural perspective of what it involves and how it differs from pre-trip planning kinds of information searches. So you see here with one of my graduate students, we were actually doing surveys on people, trying to understand whether they engage in some of these ongoing search behaviors. So we did a study in the Midwest, and then also one in Australia where we tried to understand what types of behaviors or patterns kind of merge together into this dreaming about travel, not the information search, the concrete trip planning type of information collection. And then more recently with my PhD student in Brisbane, she's been very interested in information search. And we actually looked at some of the literature and we saw that there hasn't really been much progress despite all the technological changes that we've experienced, that really it's not something where theoretically we have really progressed. So we still use the Fodness and Murray model of information search, and we maybe look at trip phases, but it's very, very much connected to actually going on a trip. So this ongoing, non-goal directed, more hedonic dreaming about travel hasn't really been covered a lot in the literature. And I was also even more surprised about this because I've been kind of monitoring the change in this information environment in social media, particularly where a lot of the content is becoming more and more inspirational, less fact-based. And we see this huge visual turn in social media research. And yet in our literature, it's still mostly looking at travel reviews on TripAdvisor, maybe the pictures people take on the trips, but really this understanding how people get inspired by what they see on social media, and how some of these, especially influencer pictures on Instagram, really, create dreams and create long-term kinds of aspirations that we haven't really explored. So I think part of that is also because dreams and visuals and these long-term kinds of engagement with travel information are also difficult to study. And really, we don't have the quantitative tools right now to kind of explore some of that more concretely. But also, I think from really a cultural perspective, we need to understand what is going on. And so I have been fortunate enough to not only be married to the guy who came up with this concept of mythnography, but also have been engaged in understanding online behaviors from a ethnographic perspective. And that means really from this deep cultural kind of perspective. So as part of my ethnographic work, and it really started a long time ago in Texas when we were studying cyber fans who got really inspired by a show called One Tree Hill to travel to different places, mostly in North Carolina. But to really kind of, go from there and understand social media phenomena at a different level. So a few years back, and I can tell you about this project now because the company actually doesn't exist anymore. But as the director of research for Ethnographica, I worked on a project with a retail store here in California, a local store. And they wanted to understand their consumers. And as part of the ethnographic work, we came across Pinterest. And we tried to convince them that Pinterest is really the place where they can actually engage with the customers in a visual way and in a project-based way. And so that all started kind of disinterest in Pinterest, I was surprised that from, first of all, a research perspective, Pinterest was not really looked at, but also from a social media marketing practical perspective, Pinterest was being dismissed a little bit. And that kind of, encouraged me as a researcher to go out and see what, is it really not useful for us as a data source? Or is it? So putting all of this together, I, beginning of last year, I guess, started noticing this emphasis on inspirational content during the COVID-19 pandemic. More and more people not being able to travel, but still talking about travel and actually talking about how much they miss travel. Having been kind of monitoring and being aware of this lack of theorizing regarding the dreaming stage of travel, also the lack of understanding of visual information by travelers, and specifically lack of understanding of Pinterest as a source of travel information and Pinterest more generally as a source of data. So those things really motivated me to say, all right, I gotta do an ethnography and I gotta investigate what's going on in terms of travel dreams and Pinterest. So the specific aims were to investigate the role of Pinterest in the dreaming stage, to also derive preliminary insights on the ongoing searches of these Pinterest users, and to explore Pinterest data as a suitable data source for qualitative as well as quantitative, more automated kinds of research. So just a little bit of theoretical background here. I told you there's not very much out there on this phase, but Fodness and Murray talk about ongoing search, but they basically dismiss it as a temporal dimension of information search strategy, something that basically happens longer before the more focused goal-directed trip planning happens. In the literature, it is sometimes mentioned as kind of this existing knowledge that people have and enduring involvement that they might have in travel, that then once they have a concrete need to travel, they just retrieve this information internally. Where that information came from in the first place is usually not discussed. It's assumed that maybe they had traveled there before, or they have this destination image, a general image that was kind of structured by different media sources. Now, from a social media perspective, a technology perspective, there's a lot that has happened that I think changes what I learned and experienced in those early focus groups in terms of how people go about dreaming about travel. And so the smartphone as well as social media have really changed not only how we find information, but also how we engage with this information. And Pinterest especially has an affordance that is pretty unique, and that is that information curation. So now we don't have a filing cabinet in the basement anymore, like that person from the Midwest. We actually have our phone, we take screenshots, we have maybe a file on our computer, or we use social media to become this memory device for us. So not only do we have internal and external memory now, we have this kind of external memory device that stores our dreams, right? And so social media, the other thing is that very often social media can actually make these travel dreams explicit. So it's not something that we have in the basement or in our brains, but that actually exists for others to explore and get inspired. So I'm not sure how many of you are avid Pinterest users. Do you want to do a quick show of hands? Who's a regular Pinterest user, a pinner? Anyone here? No? All right, interesting, right? It is actually a fascinating platform because it is an artificial intelligence powered visual search engine. So it has actually moved quite fast in the direction of AI. And has really integrated some visual algorithms that are quite unique in the social media world. So what it does is, so Pinterest, it is all visual. So there's you have captions for some pictures, but there is no commenting, no engaging in a textual kind of way. So it allows people to discover content, but then also to pin and kind of organize content, visual content. So Pinterest has over 400 million monthly active users. And not surprisingly, I think 71% of users are female. And that's because it mostly started out with recipes. So it had a huge food-related connection in the beginning. Now, in the United States, Pinterest reaches 83% of women aged 25 to 54. And so this group, from a marketing perspective, is really important because they make a lot of buying decisions in US households. And we know that these women are also incredibly important for making travel-related decisions. And 89% of US pinners use Pinterest as an inspiration in this purchase funnel, this marketing funnel, where they go to Pinterest to think about what to do, whether it's their knitting project or their home renovation or their travel. So tourism research on Pinterest, I've been looking for examples and I've been finding some, but if you are aware of some others, I would love to get to know about them. And especially if they're maybe outside of the English-speaking literature. But I've only found a handful, basically, of studies that have looked at different things from the adoption of Pinterest by tourism marketers, but then also the kind of pinning of tourist photographs, especially the last one here related to heritage tourism destinations. So just to give you an idea, since many of you are not familiar with Pinterest, from the very beginning, Pinterest had a few, and they're called boards. So these spaces where you can pin. And so it had some that were loaded, basically, pre-structured. It didn't have any content, but the headings were there. And one of these categories of board was places I'd like to go. So from a very start, Pinterest encouraged people to think about the places they'd like to visit. And you see here, my places I'd like to go Pinterest board. And so whenever you see something and you go like, oh, I would love to go there, right? You can even download a plugin to your browser and you can click on that pin and it will save it to that places I'd like to go board. Now, on the home page of Pinterest, it uses this algorithm to suggest similar contents to you that you have already pinned or that similar users to you pin. And so it is a fairly persuasive place that as soon as you log on, gives you all sorts of suggestions. So think about what it means for destinations to actually be represented here, right? How important that would be. So for whatever reason, it's telling me that I need to go to Tahiti. I don't have any problems with that. So, and Bora Bora, here we go. So that is one way in which content gets pushed to you as a Pinterest user. And then you can decide whether you pin it to your board or not. You also get frequent emails, and I'm not sure what the options are, but I think I get them almost daily. And so it gives you new ideas picked for you. And because I do pin travel related content, it gives me a lot of travel related ideas. So my travel dreams are constantly shaped by Pinterest by making these suggestions. So I wanted to see whether other people are engaging in this too, and how they do that, and what they dream about. And so I used Mythnography as a methodology. So Mythnography has different movements that you engage in, from the initiation movement, where you kind of decide on the research questions, which in my case was exploring these travel dreams, as well as the data sites, which for me was easy because it was Pinterest, to then these data collection movements. And there's 3, and I used 2 of them. I used immersion and investigation. So the immersion part is where you as a researcher really deeply engage with a site, with a data site. And I've been a Pinterest user since it actually was founded as a platform. But then I did a more intensified immersion phase for 4 weeks in early 2020 to kind of, well, actually mid 2020 to really see what was going on and how Pinterest was kind of luring me into these travel dreams. So the investigation part is where I actually looked at data from Pinterest that existed, that other pertained to other consumers. And so I looked at these places I'd like to go boards of other people. And I selected 100 of them. And these boards have, they give you different kinds of meta information. So the number of followers. So in Pinterest, you can follow a pinner or you can follow a board. So those numbers are different. The number of pins and the username of the board creator. I looked at the first row of the boards, and I will tell you in a second why. And it changes a little bit. So these 100 places I'd like to go boards in total delivered 609 pins that I analyzed. So because of the algorithm and because of the way Pinterest displays data, this really was a more than human ethnography. And this is a discussion in the literature now where we have to engage with not just data, but with platforms and their algorithms. And we have to understand that what we see is largely determined by these factors. So the pins actually change dynamically, and you have ads popping up in between. They also don't have a standardized, they have the width standardized, but not the length. So it's hard to actually go row by row. You would have to do almost column by column. So that kind of methodologically created a little bit of a challenge. Also, as you scroll down, the thing dynamically changes. So only the top row is always there. So when I wanted to go back, I really had to rely on this top row to make sure the content was stable that I was looking at. And pinning mistakes happen quite frequently. So when you click on that pin icon, Pinterest sometimes assigns it to a board. If you're not careful, it might end up in the wrong board. So there's definitely inconsistent data and data quality issues that need to be addressed. And we don't talk enough about data quality in social media research. So I would like to kind of throw this out. And there's different types of pins based on modality. So they can be videos, they can be composite images, so multiple images put together, or they can be simple still images. And so from an automated point of view, that creates a lot of problems, but even from a qualitative point of view, I had to kind of strategize in terms of how I was engaging with different kinds of content. So my goal was really to do a kind of, from a content analysis point of view, to be very exploratory and see how much I could do on a simple kind of coding level, to see whether human coding was really needed, whether what I was doing had value, or whether we could just have a machine algorithm do this for us. And so I tried to code the continent where these people were trying to travel to, what the dreams kind of told us they were thinking about. And then a little bit about the contents. I used 10 boards kind of to do a little pre-test, and came up with common features that were in these pins, and then I coded simple absence and presence. Now, the usefulness of Mythnography is that you can do this kind of broad level, more quantitative content analysis, overview kind of stuff, but then you can also go deep and look at the microscopic level. And you can interweave the investigative as well as the immersive data. So I did a data deep dive, and I looked at specific Pinterest profiles and these places I'd like to go boards within the wider context of the Pinterest users. And I will be presenting to you some of the examples that really exemplify these patterns that I found from this data. So, results. Now it gets interesting. So these 100 boards that I looked at, 94% were created by females. So no surprise, given that Pinterest attracts a more female audience. Now, I didn't have a lot of guys in that sample, but I could not find any gender-related differences. Now, that doesn't mean they aren't there. So I'm just saying that they weren't apparent in these boards and not in the way I coded them. Now, the location of these pinners is unknown. And so just from looking at the boards, you cannot tell where they're based. Now, from their names or the profile names, most of them have European or North American names. So that gave me a little bit of an idea. But from, I think, a marketing perspective, that potentially does create a little problem. We don't know where the people are who dream about Canada as a travel destination. So the descriptive analysis, I think, did deliver some overall trends that I find quite interesting. And you can tell me how you interpret them and how you relate to them. But the boards had between 68 and 2.1 million followers. So it's quite incredible, right? So there's definitely boards out there that people create just for their own benefit. But then there's also a lot of people who follow the boards of other people and create this kind of social way of dreaming about travel that we really haven't talked about. Unfortunately, in tourism, we still very much talk about information search from this kind of cognitive psychology point of view as an individual activity. Sometimes we talk about family units as information searchers and decision makers, but that's about it. Here we have a social media platform that inspires people to dream about travel together. So the the platform facilitated inspiration of others became very apparent to me because I kept seeing the same pins popping up across these different Pinterest boards. And you see here one of the pictures that I saw on almost every Pinterest board. And this was this igloo hotel destination that people just kept repinning from others. Now, in terms of the number of pins that people had in their places I'd like to go boards, they range from 85 to 11,201 pins. Now, I think my board has about 400 pins or something like that. And I do this on a fairly regular basis. And I've done it over 10 years, 15 years. Okay. So for someone to have 11,000 pins on there, that means they are really investing a lot of time and effort into this pinning activity. But on average, these are extremes, right? So you see here on average, they contain about 1,000 pins, but that's still a lot. People have 1,000 pictures saved there of places they would like to visit. And interestingly, the number of pins and the number of followers was not correlated. And I interpreted that as that Pinterest users really create these pins for their own benefit, and that this sharing is just something that happens, but that's not the initial motivation to do this. So in terms of classifying the location, it turned out that it was not as easy as I thought it would be. And I had to spend quite some time to do it. And even when I clicked on some of these pictures, they didn't necessarily tell me where they were taken. So a lot of these pictures don't have good captions, and they're not even linked to a destination page or a blog where you could then learn about the destination. So it was really the visual that people were saving. It wasn't so much about the actual destination. And but overall, I was able to identify quite a bit of the locations, and Europe and North America actually dominated the boards. Now, remember, we're talking about mostly North American users here probably. And most rows, though, displayed pins from more than one continent. So people don't necessarily just dream within one continent. They go big when they dream. And unfortunately, the date of the pin wasn't visible. There is now some sort of new date range feature, but I didn't see it implemented on any of the boards when I did my research. So I couldn't necessarily do research specifically for COVID-19 because I didn't know when the pin was added. But looking at, especially from the immersion data, looking at some of the more recent pins, they did not include many exotic destinations. So a lot of road trips, a lot of regional, national park related destinations that people were pinning. I did find some specific things related to COVID where people actually now try to search for inspiration on what to do when they can't travel. So pins that were about family staycations or you know, what to do when you're locked down, basically travel within your immediate environment, your region. Those pins were definitely there. But I can't quantify it because the date is missing. What really surprised me was that 90% of the boards had some image with a water-related feature. So when we dream about travel, we dream about lakes, rivers, oceans. We dream about fountains, whatever it is, but water. And I think environmental psychology supports this. Water is a very visually attractive image for us. only 5 of the pins that I found, of all these over 600 pins, contained animals. And that was a little surprising, especially because I just told you a lot of these pins related to national parks. But it was not the animals that people were pinning. Equally rare, churches and temples. Even though I found them here and there, they were not in the sample that I looked at, not very present. When we think about travel dreams, very often I think we think about sun and beach, especially if you're stuck in Toronto. I heard you guys had snow this morning. So I was expecting a lot of beach, and I actually only found 42% of the boards displayed an image of a beach, and 28% actually showed snow and ice. And so that was really something I didn't expect, that people really thought that these winter kinds of destinations were very attractive to them and that they should save them. Mountains and cityscapes were equally represented. So that was interested, and a small number of pins related to food. So maybe people, pinned food in a different board, but it wasn't something that they connected with the travel dreams. Now, a category that emerged from this analysis was bucket lists and best places in X. So a lot of people pin blog posts where people have pre-curated these lists of places or itineraries. And there's also a lot of hotels, specific restaurants, and specific attractions being pinned. And I think from the hotel perspective, you got to think about this. What does this mean if people actually dream about coming to my hotel rather than the overall destination? And then maps and itineraries. And this is where I think this boundary between the dreaming and the planning kind of gets mixed up a little bit. Where we see that people, when they dream, they already also pin these maps. So when they're ready to plan, they have everything in one place. All right, so now some of the profiles that are uncovered when I did this deep dive. And I had to do a little bit of stalking online to get more information about these people, and I've changed their name. But everything else about these pinners is real. And the ones I selected are the ones that really show the diversity of how people go about dreaming on Pinterest. So Katie is 45 and lives in Texas. So very often the Pinterest boards actually linked to the Facebook profile. So it was kind of easy to find out where people were located once I did a little bit of deep diving. Now, Katie has 23,000 followers overall and almost 250,000 pins. So this is a very active Pinterest user. The places I'd like to go board has over almost 3,000 pins actually and over 1,000 followers. And Katie clearly dreams of road trips to national parks in the US and Canada. So her boards are full of mountains and glaciers and rivers and canyons and waterfalls and empty roads. And so you see this kind of, her dream is this wilderness nature kind of road trip freedom dream. Now, a few pins here and there are about beach vacations, so Florida and Hawaii mostly. A little bit of Europe here and there, and sometimes I noticed that she even has some crazy exotic long haul travel destinations like Madagascar, but those are really in the minority here. It's really this national park road trip type of dream. Now she also pins more practical stuff like pre-made vacation itineraries and awesome vacation rentals, spots in Alberta that will blow your mind. But this is not the dominant Now, Chloe, she's a singer in Florida, and she has 73 boards, over 25,000 pins, so a lot less active. Her profile is followed by 2,000 pinners, but she has these travel boards. So her places I'd like to go board is actually not that active, only has 400 pins and 600 and something followers. But you see here, she has a Caribbean travel board with a lot of pins and followers. So 33,790 followers. So that's major, right? And why I picked her is really also to illustrate that her pinning changes. And so she changes her travel dreams. When you go way back in time on her board, you see all sorts of things like exotic places like Jordan and Egypt and Belize. And she had the Scottish, British phase where she had all sorts of castles. And she did, also have a lot of churches. So she was a rare one here. But her recent pins are almost exclusively about beach vacations. So you see here that these travel dreams are evolving. They're changing. This Pinterest board here is an organic kind of emerging reflection of the travel dreams. So a lot of her pins are also motivational. It's almost like a vision board, right? Where she has things like, "Dear beach, I think of you all the time." So there's no maps, no hotels, no nothing. It's visions of pristine beaches, and that's what she's currently dreaming about. So Rihanna is an African-American woman in her 30s who lives in Maryland, and she has actually 93 boards, so quite a range, and she pins about a lot of things, from weight loss to fitness to gift ideas and home decorating. So I think it's also important for us to understand how travel dreams kind of are mixed in with other kinds of motivational and aspirational pursuits that people are having. She has different kinds of travel-related boards. And she has a places I'd like to go board, but it is very practical compared to the other boards, and especially Chloe's inspirational board. So she pins travel skills, tips for solo female travelers, in-flight beauty recommendations. I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know I had to worry about, doing a facial while I was on the plane. Long haul flight survival guides. So for our Australian colleagues, that's important. How to travel on a budget, how to take travel selfies. She has a mix of destinations here, but really, I think the feeling you get is that she has a lot of anxieties and constraints that she needs to overcome to really realize these dreams. And she's trying to pin all these tips to make her dreams happen. Last but not least, Laura. She's in her 40s, lives in Colorado, and she has different boards and pins, and she pins about wine and beauty and tattoos and hairstyles and craft. She has many travel-related boards, and you see here the table from girls' trip to Guatemala to Amalfi Coast to Sri Lanka and Malta, Cuba, vacation excitement, but also travel wardrobe. But then also stateside, she pins it all. So she's very organized in where her travel pins go. In her places I'd like to go board, she really has sections. So Pinterest lets you have subcategories of things, and she doesn't put anything in the overall categories. It's all in these neat categories. And that travel dreams board really features breathtaking, stunning, ultimate fairy tale, awesome, most creative, Instagram best destinations around the world. So you get a feel for her kind of, the ultimate, her search for the ultimate vacation, right? So this is what she's dreaming of. Good. What does this all mean from my perspective? And you see here, I took a quote from one of the boards. Dreams of travel are constantly dancing in my mind. It clearly shows us that dreaming about travel is more than satisfying some functional information need. And we really, I know this is floating around in the literature, but we really need to get away from that, utility maximizing kind of trip planning and information search perspective, and add this dreaming perspective. We also need to think about the extensive and ongoing labor involved in travel dreaming. I also think we need a gendered and a diversity perspective on travel dreaming, because the pins I found, I think, really illustrate, and especially the personas illustrate, it is mostly women, but it is women of all races and all lifestyles and all age groups dreaming about travel. So I think this is a unique opportunity to think about what it means to dream about a trip from that perspective. And I think what I also take away is that this collective nature of travel dreaming and this shared inspiration is really something important that we need to consider when we think about travel dreams. Now, from a methodological perspective, I thought Pinterest was amazing. It was so rich as a data source. But I can see why not a lot of the literature talks about it, because the literature is dominated by the big data kinds of analyses, and it's not so great for that. The display algorithm is opaque. The structure of the boards is inconsistent. The pins can include these different modalities. The pre-classification that the social media platform does is not perfect, and actually scraping the image, the pin, doesn't really necessarily give you an idea of what that image is about. Now, if you have a good visual algorithm at the level of Pinterest, then yes, you can look for similarities. You can identify visual connections between pictures, but it's difficult to really do automated analysis. So for me, it really showed the strength of an ethnographic approach in terms of this flexibility of going descriptive and broad, but then also doing the rich contextual kind of understanding related research. Practical implications. I think we can't stress enough how important visuals are for this dreaming phase. And we know it intuitively. All these travel brochures have always been very visual, right? But unfortunately, in the literature still, in our research, we don't necessarily take advantage of that. And in the marketing practice, I think that there's still a lot of emphasis on text and not enough on visuals. So Pinterest affords these curations like no other social medium. So from a practical perspective, as a tourism marketer, as a hotel manager, I think you need to really think about why it is so difficult for me to identify the location of these pins. So yes, the visuals inspire people, and then they can't realize the dream because they have no idea what the name of that hotel is where they really liked the pool. So that for me suggests that we need to do a much better job optimizing websites and social media contents as tourism marketers to allow for this kind of curations. The vacation dreams, I thought, were really good for understanding the competitive positioning of a destination in the minds of a traveler. You can see it like no other data. And I've done lots of surveys where we ask people, you know, okay, think of Toronto and how does it compare to other places? Here you can see directly whether Toronto is put in the same kind of travel dream as Scotland or as Florida or wherever, right? I think the dominance of North American and European users for Pinterest limits what we can do on a global scale with Pinterest. There's also some Australian users on it, but I think we need to look at the Chinese equivalents, right, of Pinterest and how people in Asia, for example, pin and where. And also, I think really when we give travel recommendations, very often still we ask people where you want to go. And really, they don't necessarily have a name in mind. They have a vision of the place. And I think we need to have more visual ways in which people can say, this is the type of place I want to go to. Tell me where that would be. So limitations, I only did investigative and immersive data movements for ethnography. I did not elicit any data. I did not ask questions. Now on Pinterest, it's not easy to actually contact people, right? So that's a drawback. I only analyzed a snapshot of boards. I think a longitudinal understanding of individual boards and how they evolve over time. And understanding kind of the rhythm of pinning and dreaming, that would be important. I did not code the source of the pin, so where that pin was pinned from, and I think that would be very interesting. I noticed that very often it comes from a blog, so it comes from other social media sources, not from the official destination website. And the content analysis, of course, was very, very coarse and mainly for illustrative purposes. And there's so much more that could be coded there and that could be explored in terms of the co-occurrences of destinations and maybe even using network analysis, but that was not the goal of this. So thank you so much. I'm really excited that you let me share my research dream. And I'm ready to take your questions.
That's great. Thanks, Uli. Yeah, round of applauses. Nice. So there's been a couple of questions come up in the chat already. Okay. And so just to people listening, feel free to either raise your hand, come off mute and ask your questions. And if you type them into the chat, I'll read them out for you. So Lule, I think, has asked which software was used to do the coding.
So I actually just put everything into Excel, and I know that people use NVivo and Atlas TI and everything. I still find that these platforms are not necessarily the best to do this kind of coding. So I'm a little old school, but it doesn't say that you couldn't do this with any kind of qualitative research software. I like to have, the link there, but yes, it was not ideal. And to be honest, Rob and I are discussing it all the time. We need a better platform for ethnographic research. If you know any computer science people who are in that space, we have a lot of ideas in terms of what needs to be done to really manage, especially the visual data. I think a lot of text analysis programs are getting pretty good in terms of helping you analyze text, but definitely not in terms of storing and analyzing these different kinds of modalities of data.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting that yeah, the old-fashioned ways often it gives you a bit more flexibility, I guess, sometimes to offer your own interpretation or make those decisions, perhaps. Yeah. And thank you, Marie Claude. I read your surname, not your first name. Apologies. From Farshid, how could one mitigate potential selection biases when researching Pinterest, such as a lack of demographic diversity, especially for gender?
Yeah, so I mean, that depends on the research question. You could definitely see that as a problem, right? I see it as an advantage to have a more homogeneous sample there, and actually a demographic that might be more difficult to reach through other kinds of means. But yes, I mean, I actually tried to, I coded the gender, and you can identify it in, some people have a profile picture, some people have a name. And I would say for about 80% of the people, I was able to figure out whether they were female or male. But it's not perfect. And so this is definitely, if you want to do more quantitative research where sampling is really important, you have to find a way to understand this. Now, location was definitely a problem. So I agree. If you want to sample North American travelers, you probably have a good chance of hitting them in this platform, right? But if you're looking for anything else, you would have a hard time finding a specific sample and identifying them as such. But again, does it matter? That depends on your research.
Great, thank you. From somebody called Frederick. Salut. Do you want to ask your question, Frederick? Do you want me to read it for you?
Yes, please, you can read it. Hi,
All
Willie.
Hi.
Are Pinterest users really dreaming, or could they just be collecting pictures as a hobby?
And so I think some of the boards that I talked about, it was more, first of all, it was more at the border of this kind of collecting pictures for later use. Is it just a visual, you know, I like to look at pictures kind of thing? Yes, but they're travel related. So what's the difference there between dreaming about traveling or just, you know, getting inspired and consuming imagery of destinations? I think that that's a very fluid kind of space there, I think. And it doesn't necessarily say that they will travel, right? That's always the problem with this dreaming, and this is why the industry doesn't necessarily talk about dreaming. But I'm saying they should, and they should understand whether people like to look at the images that are floating around there about the destinations, and especially if you're that igloo hotel. Oh my God! Like people found that so attractive, that picture, that they made an effort to add it to their places I'd like to go. I think just the title of the board though does suggest that there is kind of like, you know, a dream component there. Tom, you wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, just a follow-up question. Like, did you pick up any evidence or examples where people, not just, you know, places I'd like to go, but places I've been, like that?
Yeah. So, but that's usually then a separate board. So then they have the my 2019 trip to Lake Louise, for example, right? So that would be a separate board, and that's interesting, right? Because now we're talking about the circle of representation, and now it closes because when people come back from the trip, they still pin these pictures that remind them of the trip. So we have the dreaming boards, and then we have the memory boards where people collect these images of places they have been to. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it could be really interesting to see, you know, here are the 50 places I would like to go, but which one did I actually go to, right? And does it reflect what I said? And, you know, it could be an interesting comparison. From Mariam, do you think that Pinterest can actually be used by destinations to promote themselves? I mean,
yeah, and so a while ago, actually, I lived in Wollongong. So that's an Australian city just south of Sydney. And the tourism director there was really into social media and had an excellent team. And they were super active on Pinterest because they knew that the algorithm would promote the imagery for them like nothing else. In Facebook, you have to invest a lot of money in order to get that kind of organic reach. We're talking organic reach here, right? Yes, there's also the advertising part. You can run advertising on Pinterest, but you don't have to. Whereas on Facebook nowadays, you have to. There's no way anyone. I can't even remember when I last saw a destination post on my Facebook feed. It's almost impossible to do that unless it's sponsored. So they also said, because you pin a link, it really helps their search engine optimization. And so from an overall destination website kind of online marketing perspective, it was super important for them to feed Pinterest with attractive images that then other people pin. Because all these search algorithms pick up on that. And so Pinterest is a search engine by itself, but then Google also notices when people actually start pinning a lot. So it notices the links that are coming in from Pinterest. So yes, absolutely 100% destinations as well as hotels and restaurants should have inspirational content out there, and especially because then as a marketer, you can put those captions on. You can have the more professional imagery, but you have to understand the aesthetics. People pin wow pictures, right? And this is also where a lot of imagery now comes from Instagram. So I think thinking about the social media ecosystem and how these different platforms reinforce themselves is really important for social media marketing these days.
Great, thank you. A question from, forgive me, it's the name that I see is Anandi. I don't know if that's your last name or first name, but forgive me. Most destinations do not invest resources in Pinterest except for CA. I don't know if that's California or Canada. I'm guessing they don't think the platform has much impact for marketing. Can a similar study using Instagram be more impactful if it hasn't already been done?
Okay, so for Instagram, we can see what people post, but it's mostly things they post when they actually go on a trip. And on Instagram, you don't necessarily share so much what other people have posted, right? So Instagram, the culture of Instagram is a little different. And I think yes, people get inspired by what influencers, for example, post on Instagram, but it's not as visible. They follow influencers, but they don't follow a specific image. On Pinterest, you can see specifically it was that exact image of the pool from this angle that made our hotel Pinterest famous, right? And that's just not possible with Instagram. So what we can look at in Instagram is the imagery that is out there that people are posting when they travel. But I mean, I don't know. I have never pinned or I've never, Instagrammed a promotional picture of a destination to my story or my feed, right? This is not something you do. You create your own kind of trip story, but not your dream. Is that clear? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's true. You can save images, but again, it's not public. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
You can always take a screenshot, right? Wherever, if you are online, you can always take a screenshot. But what is interesting is this public and the social nature of interest.
I mean, that was a point I picked up on in your presentation. It's really an interesting point that the motivation doesn't seem to be about, when you pin something, it's not about getting attention from other people, right? Like other social media platforms seem to be, give me attention, look at me. And this is more about my collection. And that's quite an interesting, I guess there is some, from a implications viewpoint, there'll be limitations from that because, you're not trying to engage people to share stuff, to encourage them to influence their followers as much, but just a very different insight into how people are thinking about the destination and the different stages.
It's really the platform that encourages that, because of these suggestions and because it pushes content to you based on the visual similarity. So it's not so much, and you follow these boards, and if someone has amazing trip pictures that you really like the way they dream about travel and you want to follow that, then you can do that. But yeah.
I had a question about your thoughts on, so I read a paper not too long ago about using Google, and I'm not an expert at all, but Google have a function that you can submit images to, and it categorizes them using an algorithm, machine learning, so on. And I'm kind of curious just on your thoughts broadly about how useful those types of methods are, because I see the advantage in being able to analyze large amounts of content relatively quickly and easily. But I also wonder about the risk of losing context in the images that are being analyzed, and what's actually being presented in that image that might require some kind of subjective understanding rather than describing what's in them. And is that something that you're able to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, and so because I am interested in artificial intelligence and visual recognition, right, is a big topic in this, and I've been following the visual search engine development for at least a decade. So there's certain things that the machine learning is pretty good at recognizing, and that's brand logos, for example. Now, in tourism, unfortunately, that's not very useful, because people usually don't, when they, unless they do what I do, all right, you don't usually see the logo in the pictures that they post. So, yeah, so if you're Coca-Cola, amazing. You can search social media and see exactly where your product pops up and how people are using it and talking about it. It's also pretty good for faces, right? But even there, we know it's not good at recognizing diverse faces, for example. It's very good at recognizing white faces. Okay, so that's good. It's pretty good in kind of identifying iconic things like the Eiffel Tower, right? And those are geometric forms, the Sydney Opera House. It can identify mountains. There's different shapes that the algorithm can learn about. Now, in general, an algorithm needs millions of pictures. Like, it needs millions of pictures of a cucumber to be able to identify a cucumber. Now, in tourism, again, we have so many, beaches, for example, that look very similar. I cannot imagine how an algorithm would deal with that. So I think eventually they're getting better and getting better. This is really great for identifying content, but it doesn't give you understanding, right? It kind of allows you to filter data, but the interpretation part, unless again you have your logo there, you kind of know that the CN tower looks like this, and so it can count how many times it appears. It doesn't tell you anything about how people relate to it and where it appeared in what context. Yeah, absolutely. So I think these tools are amazing for some things, but they can also be distracting. And I see more and more qualitative research of social media data where people, for example, let in vivo, classify some things where I'm like, this is really not the purpose of doing, qualitative research. And I also see a lot of, even on the qualitative side of struggles to interpret images, right? It's not easy even for a human to understand why this picture was there. And that's why my limitation was that I think I need to talk to some of these pinners. I need to understand what is going on. I can see the result of the pinning activities, but not necessarily the motivations and the thinking behind it.
Very interesting, thank you. I have a question from Madison. Was any research done on the number of sponsored travel posts that are pinned? I would assume it is much less than organic pins.
Yeah, so as I said in my limitations, I did not look at the source of the pin. So, but in general, even though they now pop up a lot more, these sponsored posts, I did not see them repinned. Those are things that people click on that lead them to our website, but they then maybe pin another picture that, these sponsored posts, they kind of look more like ads than what you would actually pin. But so yes, almost the 600 something pins I looked at were exclusively organic pins and mostly coming from other social media users, blogs, rather than actual marketers.
Great, thank you. Are there any last questions that people would like to come off mute and ask or type into the chat? We've got a couple of minutes if anyone wants to add something. All right, well, I'm gonna just have a couple of closing remarks. And Ulrike, is there anything else you wanted to add before we do the closing remarks?
No, I'm sending you some California sunshine, and I hope I will get to see you guys at Ryerson at some point.
Yeah, it would be lovely to see you in Ontario. And I imagine there's a few people that like to perhaps come off mute and just have a quick casual chat after this. So I'll quickly just say, thank you so much for your time. It was a really interesting presentation. It's really interesting research, and no doubt you are busy, and giving us this time is we appreciate it a lot. So I'd also like to share that on February the 24th at 5 p.m. we're going to be hearing from Dr. Anne Hardy, who is with the University of Tasmania, and she's going to be talking to us about tracking tourists. And she's just released a new book about the different ways that we can look at tourist behavior in our destinations, moving around our destinations and what they're doing. So really interesting research with both methodological and practical implications. So really encourage you to sign up on our website and check out our website, htmresearch.ca. So thanks everyone. Thanks to Brian for organizing. Well done, Brian. Awesome job. And that's it. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. Bye. Thanks, Uli.
Thank you, Uli.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. And thanks for all the attendees. We've had people from Quebec to Vancouver Island and Mexico. And so, you know, and maybe some other places that I don't know.
Yeah, Indonesia. I see someone from
Indonesia,
Indonesia.
fantastic.
Yeah.
So that was really good.
Colombia.
Oh, wow. Blanca's in Colombia.
Oh, Blanca, you're in Colombia.
Oh, Berlin.
I'm spending COVID